Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are dissecting a figure who is, I think, universally recognized, but almost universally misunderstood. We are talking about Claude Debussy. And usually, when that name comes up, the immediate association is Clair de Lune.
Right. It's the go-to.
It's moonlight, it's soft edges, it's the soundtrack to a spa day or a romantic dinner. We have this very sanitized, sort of pastel-colored image of him.
Which is the ultimate irony, really, because Debussy was probably the most militant, radical, and I'd even say aggressive disruptor in the history of Western music.
Aggressive is a good word for it.
Yeah. We treat him like a painter of pretty pictures, but he was actually an arsonist. He burned down the entire structure of tonality that had stood for, 300 years?
Exactly. And that is the mission of today's Deep Dive. We're working off a really comprehensive biography and analysis of his life and work, and we want to shatter that impressionist label.
Oh, we have to.
We need to look at how a man who came from a family with absolutely no musical background, a china shop owner's son, managed to rewrite the rules of harmony so thoroughly that everyone from Stravinsky to Miles Davis walked through the door he kicked open.
It's a massive topic. I mean, we are talking about the pivot point between Romanticism and modernism. And to understand Debussy, you have to get that he wasn't just drifting away from the rules. He was actively, and with real intention, dismantling them with an almost mathematical precision.
And his personal life was just as volatile as his music was calculated. We have this tendency to separate the art from the artist, but in Debussy's case, his absolute refusal to compromise, his pursuit of pleasure is the ultimate law. It caused an immense amount of destruction in his personal relationships. I mean, we're talking about scandals that alienated his closest friends, dual suicide attempts by his partners, and a personality that was often described as difficult, to say the very least.
He was a complicated man living in a complicated time. We're looking at late 19th, early 20th century Paris. This is the Belle Epoque, but it's also a time of huge artistic upheaval. You've got the symbolist poets, the impressionist painters, and then you have Debussy trying to find a sound that matches that elusive, shifting, kind of strange atmosphere.
So let's start at the beginning, because his origins really undermine this whole assumption that high art has to come from high society. You look at the heavy hitters of classical music, and usually there's a lineage.
Oh, yeah, there's a pedigree.
Bach came from a massive musical family. Mozart's dad was a court musician. But Debussy
is a complete anomaly in that regard. He was born in 1862 in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, but his family was incredibly modest and, frankly, pretty unstable.
China shop, right?
His father, Manuel Achille, ran a china shop that failed. The family moved to Paris, they bounced between relatives, and his father eventually ended up working in a printing factory. There was no piano in the house. There were no breathless discussions about sonata form over dinner. Culturally, he was starting with a complete blank slate.
It's fascinating because that lack of indoctrination might have been exactly what allowed him to break the rules later. He didn't grow up revering the German masters in the cradle.
That's a great point.
But the way he actually started music is one of those bizarre historical accidents. It's tied directly to the Franco-Prussian War of 1870.
Right. It's a total sliding doors moment. If that war doesn't happen, we probably don't get La Mer.
How so?
Paris was under siege. It was a terrifying place to be. So Debussy's pregnant mother took him and his sister down to Cannes to stay with an aunt just to escape the violence. It was there, in the south of France, that his aunt paid for his first piano lessons with an Italian musician named Jean Cerruti. He was 7 years old.
Just on a whim, basically. But the story gets even grittier. While Claude is in Cannes, his father stays in Paris and gets involved in the Commune.
The revolutionary socialist government that took over Paris for a bit.
And that is not a small detail in the family history.
No, it was dangerous. When the Commune was crushed by the French army, Manuel Achille was arrested. He was imprisoned for his involvement. And this is where fate just steps in again.
Okay.
In prison, Debussy's father meets another prisoner, a musician named Charles de Sèvres. They're sharing a cell, or at least a communal space, and they start talking. Sèvres mentions that his mother is a piano teacher.
It sounds like a plot from a Dickens novel. The father is arranging his son's musical education from a prison cell.
Precisely. Sèvres recommended his mother, Antoinette Mottet de Fleurville. Now, Madame Mottet was a real character. She was very affected, very grande dame, and she made this incredibly bold claim. She said she had studied directly with Frédéric Chopin.
And is there any evidence for that, or was she just padding the resume?
Biographers have fought over this for decades. There's no hard documentary proof, but the way she taught, her technique, her emphasis on phrasing and touch, it was incredibly close to the Chopin tradition. So whether she actually sat in a room with Chopin or not, she knew what she was doing. She took Debussy on, saw the raw potential in this uneducated kid, and she drilled him. And in 1872, at age 10, she got him into the Conservatoire de Paris.
Which brings us to the first major conflict of his life. The Conservatoire is the establishment. It is the guardian of tradition.
Absolutely.
You go there to learn how to write like the masters, not to reinvent the wheel. And Debussy enters this environment as, well, as a problem.
A sketchy problem, to use the words of his teachers. He spent 11 years there, and the reports are hilarious in hindsight. You have this completely split opinion.
How so?
His piano teacher, Marmontel, clearly liked him. He called him a charming child with a truly artistic temperament. He recognized the raw talent, but the theory teachers, they were pulling their hair out.
I remember reading the comments from Émile Durand, his harmony teacher. He called Debussy desperately careless.
And sketchy. Because Debussy wasn't struggling to understand the rules, he was refusing to accept their validity. He'd sit at the piano and play these strange, unresolved chord progressions, and when the teacher asked what rule he was following, he'd just shrug.
But he was a great player.
No, an incredible pianist. He could sight read anything, but he was intermittently diligent. He only worked when he felt like it.
Yet he managed to play the game well enough to win the ultimate prize, the Prix de Rome in 1884. This was the golden ticket for any French composer.
The absolute pinnacle.
You win, and the state pays for you to live at the Villa Medici in Rome for a huge stretch of time.
And for 99% of musicians, that is the dream. For Debussy, it was a prison sentence. He despised Rome. He hated the Villa Medici, which he found stifling. He hated the other students, whom he found boorish. He even complained about the food constantly.
So much for the great artist's retreat.
He wasn't interested in the Renaissance masters or Italian opera. He famously rejected the music of Donizetti and Verdi, which was dominating Italy at the time.
It's so telling that while he's in Rome, surrounded by all this history, he retreats into 16th century church music. He loved Palestrina and Lassus.
That makes perfect sense when you look at his later work. Palestrina's music is all about flowing lines and independent voices, not the rigid block chords of the later classical era. Debussy was already looking for a way out of the 19th century.
There's a quote from a letter, isn't there?
Yeah, he wrote this letter that is essentially his manifesto. I am too enamored of my freedom, too fond of my own ideas.
And the Academy in Paris did not appreciate those ideas. He had to send his work back to prove he was actually composing, and the reports were just savage.
Oh, brutal. They called his music bizarre, incomprehensible, and unperformable.
Unperformable, wow.
They were trying to force him back onto the main road, and he was already hacking his way through the jungle. This whole experience really sets the stage for his return to Paris. He eventually just left Rome early because he couldn't stand it.
And he comes back to a Paris that's just buzzing with new ideas. And he starts to forge what we now call the Debussy sound.
Exactly.
And this is where we have to get technical, because Impressionism is the label everyone uses, but it's a label he violently rejected.
I hated it.
He called it imbecilic when critics applied it to his work.
Yeah.
So why the hostility?
Well, think about what Impressionism meant in painting at the time. You know, Monet, Renoir. It was about light blurring edges, capturing a fleeting moment.
Right.
When critics applied that to music, they were essentially accusing Debussy of being vague. They were saying his music lacked form, lacked structure, that it was just a wash of pretty sound. And Debussy felt his music was incredibly structured, just not in the German way.
But he didn't help his own case with the titles. I mean, Reflections in the Water, the Sea, Mists.
True. He was evoking nature, which is very impressionist. But if we look at the mechanics, the actual nuts and bolts, we see he's doing something much more radical than just blurring.
This is the pleasure is the law idea.
Yeah. He famously told his teacher, Garot, there is no theory. You have only to listen. Pleasure is the law.
That quote is so often interpreted as him being lazy or just purely hedonistic. But pleasure is the law is actually a rigorous acoustic philosophy.
It's totally rigorous. In the German tradition, think Beethoven, Brahms' harmony is functional. It's a narrative. A dominant chord creates tension, and it must resolve to the tonic to release that tension. It's a syntax, like a sentence. Subject, verb, object.
And Debussy said?
Debussy said no. A chord is a sound object. It doesn't have to go anywhere. It can just float.
And this leads to that technique of parallel chords, which, in traditional harmony, moving a chord in parallel, just sliding your hand up the keyboard keeping the same shape, was strictly forbidden.
Strictly. It creates parallel fifths and octaves. And the reason it was forbidden is crucial. In classical counterpoint, you want independence of voices. The soprano line and the bass line should be distinct personalities.
Okay.
If they move in parallel fifths, they lose that independence. They just blend into one thick sound. The error is that the counterpoint collapses. But Debussy wanted them to blend.
So he didn't care about the voices.
He treated the chord as a single color, like a mixture on an organ stop. He wasn't writing 4 separate voices. He was writing one complex sonority.
So he breaks the rule of voice, leading to achieve a specific acoustic effect. And then he combines that with scales that they destroy the sense of home. We have to talk about the whole tone scale.
This is a huge hallmark of his sound. Traditional scales are asymmetrical. They have half steps and whole steps. That asymmetry creates gravity. It tells your ear where the home note is.
And the whole tone scale
It's perfectly symmetrical. It's all whole steps. C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. Because the intervals are all equal, there is no center. There is no gravity. You can't feel a pull to resolve. It creates that suspended, floating, dreamlike quality we all associate with him.
But there's a deeper layer to his structure that I want to bring in here, because the Impressionist critique implies he was just improvising, just making it up as he went.
Right, that he was just vague.
But modern analysis, specifically by Roy Howitt, suggests there's a hidden architecture beneath the waves. We're talking about the golden ratio.
This is where that vague argument completely falls apart. Roy Howitt's analysis in his book Debussy in Proportion is mind-blowing. He looked at pieces like La Mer and Reflet dans l'eau, and he literally counted the measures.
What did he find?
He found that the climatic moments, the changes in texture, or the dynamic peaks often occur exactly at the golden section, which is roughly 0.618 of the piece's total length.
And this involves the Fibonacci sequence as well, the 1, 1, 2, 3, 5.
Yes. The structural divisions often correspond to Fibonacci numbers. Now, Debussy never explicitly wrote, "I am using the golden ratio here," but he was obsessed with the esoteric. He knew the symbolist poets who were into numerology.
So it might have been deliberate.
Whether it was intuitive because the golden ratio is naturally pleasing to the human ear, or whether he was calculating it, the point is the structure is rigid. It's not a wash of sound. It's a mathematical suspension bridge.
That is a critical distinction. It completely changes how you hear the music. It's not wandering, it's spiraling. Now, we've mentioned the symbolists. Debussy was hanging out with poets like Mallarmé and Verlaine, not so much other musicians. But he did have musical influences, and one of the biggest shocks to his system happened in 1889 at the Paris Exposition Universelle.
The World's Fair. This is where the Eiffel Tower comes from. But for music history, the big event was the Javanese Pavilion. Debussy walked in and heard a gamelan orchestra for the first time.
For our listeners, can you describe that? This is an Indonesian ensemble, gongs, metallophones, drums. It's a very percussive, metallic, shimmering sound.
And it operates on a completely different musical logic. It's cyclic, not linear. It uses scales that don't map onto the Western piano at all. Debussy sat there for hours, totally mesmerized. He realized that the Western rules of counterpoint were not universal laws of physics.
They were just local customs.
They were just local customs. You can hear the gamelan directly in his piece Pagodes from his Stomp. He mimics the layers, the pentatonic scales, the static harmony. It's a direct transcription of that experience.
It gave him permission to look outside the Germanic tradition. And speaking of which, we have to address the elephant in the room, Richard Wagner.
Ah, Wagner.
Every composer in the late 19th century had to deal with Wagner.
Wagner was the sun and everyone else was a planet. You either orbited him or you tried to fly away and burned up. Debussy went through a heavy Wagner phase. He even made the pilgrimage to Bayreuth, but he eventually turned against him. He called Wagner a beautiful sunset that was mistaken for a dawn.
That is such a devastatingly poetic takedown.
It is. It implies that Wagner had perfected the romantic form so completely that there was nowhere left to go. It was the end of an era, not the start of one.
Right.
Wagner is all about heavy, endless development, yearning, massive orchestras. Debussy wanted clarity, brevity, and understatement. He wanted the dawn. He wanted to suggest rather than describe.
Which brings us to the masterpiece that arguably launched modern music.
Prélude and Après-midi d'un faun.
Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun, premiered in 1894. Pierre Boulez famously said that the flute of the faun brought new breath to the art of music. And if you listen to that opening flute solo, you understand exactly why.
You do.
It's iconic, It's unaccompanied, it's in a weird low register for the flute, and rhythmically it's just slippery. You can't quite tap your foot to it.
Exactly. It fills the measure in a way that just obscures the beat. It creates a sense of improvisation. And the piece doesn't develop in the Beethoven sense, doesn't present a theme, fight with it, and resolve it. It unfolds. It presents a color, shifts the light, presents it again. It's the musical equivalent of walking through a gallery rather than reading a novel.
While Fong was a success, his relationship with the opera world was much more contentious. Pelléas and Mélisande is his only completed opera, and the drama behind the scenes was arguably more intense than what was happening on stage.
Oh, it's a disaster of interpersonal conflict. The libretto is the original play by Maurice Maeterlinck, and Maeterlinck gave Debussy the rights, but he had a very specific condition in his mind.
Which was
He wanted his mistress, Georgette Leblanc, to sing the lead role of Mélisande.
the classic "I'll make you a star" move.
Exactly. But Debussy didn't care about Maeterlinck's domestic bliss. He cared about his opera. He heard a Scottish soprano named Mary Garden, and he decided she was Mélisande. She had the voice, the look, the specific detached quality he wanted, so he cast her.
And Maeterlinck declared war.
Literally. He threatened to cane Debussy in the street. There was talk of a duel. He wrote an open letter to the newspaper Le Figaro, hoping the opera would fail thoroughly and famously.
Wow. The author of the text actively campaigning against the adaptation.
Can you imagine? Despite the sabotage, the opera premiered in 1902. It divided the audience, but it established Debussy as the leader of the French avant-garde. It's the anti-Wagner opera. The characters whisper, they don't belt out arias. The orchestra provides a psychological undercurrent, not a bombastic commentary.
And just a few years later, he tackles the orchestral repertoire with La Mer. Now, for a piece that captures the violence and majesty of the ocean so perfectly, the composition setting was quite ironic.
It was.
He wasn't lashing himself to the mast of a ship in a storm.
No. He was sitting in a comfortable room at the Grand Hotel in Eastbourne, looking at the English Channel, which is arguably more polite than the wild Atlantic. But he wrote from memory and imagination. He called them symphonic sketches, rejecting the title of symphony.
He didn't want the baggage of the German symphony.
Exactly. But the critics were skeptical again. Pierre Lelot wrote that brutal line, "I do not hear, I do not see, I do not smell the sea."
Ouch.
Which just proves that critics can be deaf. La Mer is a masterpiece of orchestration. The way he divides the strings, the way he uses the brass to create swells, it's visceral.
Okay, so we've alluded to his personality, but we really need to confront the chaos of his personal life. Because while his music was about control and precision, his life was a train wreck of debt and broken hearts.
Trainwreck is accurate. Debussy was a true bohemian, but a bohemian with expensive taste. He loved fine prints, first edition books, good food, imported tea, but he rarely had the money for it. He lived on debt.
And he had a very sharp tongue. He worked as a music critic under the pseudonym Monsieur Croche, Mr. Eighth Note.
And he was savage. He tore apart the Paris opera. He mocked Saint-Saëns. He was not trying to be liked.
But the real damage was in his romantic relationships. It's a pattern of using women as muses and then just discarding them when they no longer served his pleasure.
Yeah, it's a grim pattern. It starts with Marie Vaznier, a married woman he had an affair with in his youth. Then there's Gaby Dupont, who lived with him in poverty for nearly a decade. She supported him, dealt with his moods.
And then he cheated on her.
While living with her, he got engaged to a singer named Thérèse Roget.
While still living with Gaby.
Yes. The engagement imploded when his double life was revealed. His friends were disgusted. But he eventually left Gaby for her friend, Lily Texier.
Lily seems to be the most tragic figure in all of this. She was a seamstress, practical, kind, beloved by his friends, but not an intellectual.
No. And he threatened suicide if she didn't marry him. It was pure emotional blackmail. They married in 1899. But he quickly grew bored. He complained that she didn't understand his music. And then he met Emma Bardak.
Emma was a whole different league. Sophisticated, wealthy, a brilliant singer who had been Gabriel Fauré's muse.
She was his intellectual equal. And in 1904, Debussy orchestrated his exit. He sent Lily away to visit her parents. While she was gone, he packed his bags and ran off with Emma to the island of Jersey.
He just left her a letter.
He wrote Lily a letter ending the marriage, but didn't even mention Emma. He effectively abandoned her without the courage to tell her the truth.
That's just awful.
Lily was devastated. She went to the Place de la Concorde in Paris and shot herself in the chest with a revolver.
I guess.
She survived, but the bullet remained lodged in her vertebrae for the rest of her life. The scandal was nuclear. Paris turned on Debussy. His closest friends, Paul Dukas, Andre Messenger, cut him off completely.
And this affected his relationship with Ravel, too, right?
Yes, Ravel, who admired Debussy, contributed to a fund for Lilly's medical bills. Debussy saw that as a betrayal and cut ties with Ravel.
He burned his entire social circle to be with Emma.
He did. They eventually married in 1908 and had a daughter, Claude Emma, known as Chouchou. And this is the great paradox of Debussy. He was a terrible husband and a questionable friend, but by all accounts, he was a devoted father. He adored Chouchou.
Children's Corner is dedicated to her. It has that piece, Gollywog's Cakewalk, which is this cheeky, ragtime-infused piece.
Yeah, it shows his lighter side and his awareness of American music. He even quotes the opening of Wagner's Tristan und Isolde in the middle of a ragtime dance. It's a musical joke, basically mocking Wagner's seriousness with a silly cakewalk.
But the domestic happiness with Emma and Chouchou was tragically short-lived. In 1909, he received a diagnosis that effectively started the clock ticking.
Colorectal cancer. He was only 47. The last decade of his life was a slow, agonizing decline. He underwent a colostomy in 1915, which was a brutal, primitive surgery at the time.
He was in constant pain.
Constant pain. He described just dressing himself in the morning as one of the labors of Hercules.
And this personal suffering coincided with the outbreak of World War I in 1914. For a man who had spent his life fighting the Germanic influence in music, the war became a literal manifestation of that struggle.
He became fiercely patriotic. He started signing his scores Claude Debussy, musicien français, French musician. He saw the war as a conflict between French values, clarity, elegance, freedom, and German values, which he saw as heaviness, aggression, brutality.
He even compared the German army to Wagner's music.
He did, and he channeled that anger into his late works, like En Blanc et Noir for two pianos. It's a dark, jagged piece. In the second movement, he quotes Luther's hymn, "A mighty fortress is our God," a symbol of German strength, and then he just twists it, distorts it. It was his way of fighting back from the piano bench, but his energy was fading.
He died on March 25, 1918. He was 55. And the atmosphere of his death and funeral was just incredibly grim.
Paris was being shelled by the German Long Max guns. The city was a ghost town. Public funerals were banned because of the danger. So his procession moved through these deserted streets to a temporary grave at Père Lachaise. It was a silent, lonely end for the man who had changed the sound of the world.
And Chouchou, the light of his life.
She tragically died just a year later in the diphtheria epidemic of 1919. She was only 13. She was buried in his grave.
It's a heartbreaking coda. But the music, of course, survived. And the legacy is fascinating because the immediate reaction from the next generation was actually rejection.
Right. You have less six composers like Poulenc and Milhaud who rebelled. They said Debussy was too misty, too vague. They wanted hard edges, machinery, jazz, surrealism. They wanted to wake up from the dream.
But you can't kill an influence that deep. Bartók, Stravinsky, they all acknowledged him. But I want to close on the connection that I think resonates most with modern listeners. Jazz.
This is the lineage that really matters for the 20th century. If you listen to jazz harmony, specifically the evolution from bebop to modal jazz, you are hearing Debussy. You just are.
Okay, can we be specific? What exactly are we hearing in, say, Bill Evans or Herbie Hancock that comes from Debussy?
It's the extensions and the voicing. Debussy loved 9th, 11th, and 13th chords. In classical harmony, those are dissonances that need to resolve. Debussy treated them as stable colors. He would also stack chords and fourths, what we call chordal harmony, which gives that open, modern sound.
And that's what Bill Evans does.
When you hear Bill Evans play the opening of So What or his work on Kind of Blue, he is using those Debussy voicings. He's letting the chord just sit there as a color, ambiguous and rich.
So in a way, Kind of Blue is the spiritual successor to Prélude à l'après-midi du vent.
Without a doubt. Bill Evans studied Debussy intensely. There were famous recordings of him playing Reflet dans l'eau. He understood that Debussy had liberated harmony from function, and once you do that, modern jazz becomes possible.
It's an incredible journey, from the china shop in Saint-Germain-en-Laye through the prison cells of the Commune, battling the Conservatoire, scandalizing Paris, and finally echoing in the jazz clubs of New York.
The critic Ernest Newman summed it up beautifully. He said Debussy spent a third of his life discovering himself, a third realizing himself, and a third losing himself to illness. But that middle third changed everything.
And it leaves us with a provocative thought. Debussy refused to follow the rules of development. He prioritized pleasure and color over argument and structure. In today's world where we often listen to music for vibe, for texture, think ambient playlists, lo-fi beats, film scores, Did Debussy actually invent the way we consume music now?
I think he did. I really do. He taught us that the texture is the message. He taught us to listen to the sound itself, not just the structure holding it up.
So here's my challenge to you. Go listen to Prélude après-midi d'enfant. Don't look for a melody you can hum.
Yeah.
Don't try to analyze it. Just put on headphones and listen to the colors. Listen to the texture of that flute and realize you are hearing the exact moment the modern world began.
And remember, pleasure is the law.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.